Sup Shredders, my name is Logan aka Spiderhands and welcome to an SP Reacts where today we got ourselves 3 tracks from an album from Boarzoy titled The Great Fires. If we switch over to here, the first of these tracks that we have on the screen. The Great Fires is self-titled, put the art up there as well. We're going to listen through each of these 3 tracks from start till finish and we're going to hear what we think. Let's do it, The Great Fires. Very articulate on the kit.
Was this gifted to you before you know it? Something has always been there. Haven't you always thought the worst things? Wish for dimmer skies and breathe sodden air. Down's creeping, she's the killer. There's heat on your back, but ice in your core. The exceptional taste of the withering. Dead in the streets, covered in veils, plowing for more. Where will I go now?
Very double tracking there.
Down and down and down. Disposition, but there are skeletons in the walls, babe, and they've been talking if you listen. Cobwebs on the table, yeah, dying cowboys on the wall, drowning silence with indifference, round in time, love to crawl, love to crawl.
I love how jagged the groove of it is. Great adjustment of tempo and tone here. Right pinch hum on it there. like how active the bass is in this. That was fantastic. And then the feedback fades us out. That was incredible. Really stoked about that one. The Great Fires, Boarzoy, track number 1. So in this post-track section, I'm going to provide an overall song analysis from lyrics and vocals all the way through to studio production. I'm going to do it for each of the 3 tracks after their individual bits, including this one. And then at the end, there's going to be like an overall analysis, including any applicable constructive critique, and then finally my general overall thoughts from a listener's perspective. But first of all, what do we think this track is about? The Great Fires to me seems to be about someone asking a lot of questions about the skeletons in the walls and what surrounds us, kind of whispering and asking whether we're listening to that or not, and wondering how we're going to pave our roads. I do also kind of get the impression that the Great Fires are currently happening, or they have occurred, and we're kind of wondering how we can push forward into something of a better solution, or a better, more sort of like less destructive future. I wonder if the rest of the album is describing that, you know, that situation there, and then at the end we're kind of asking some questions. We're acknowledging some of the less desirable things that are occurring at this point, and wanting to do things better in future. And ultimately, I feel like if that is the correct takeaway, and I apologize if it's not, that's just on a first listen basis, I feel that's an incredibly interesting type of subject matter to discuss. There was a lot to take in with this track. One of the things I really appreciate is the actual vocals themselves. We're incredibly comfortable within our range. We have some lovely vocal melodies and harmonies and some legato passages. We explore both diatonic and chromatic notes, you know. We also have this phenomenal vocal fry with this kind of visceral kind of like technique where we kind of growl or scream. Not entirely sure what the correct word for it is, but it's just so tasteful in a weird way. I know it might not necessarily be everyone's cup of tea depending on the style of music you're used to, but for me personally, I think when you're trying to express a grave sort of sentiment or an emotion, that is a style of vocals that is appropriate. So ultimately, I feel that it was incredibly well done. It seems like the technique itself is sustainable, and we went between those different styles in a way that I feel is ultimately productive for the overall listening experience. So I think in terms of how we communicated, the variations of the way that we sort of performed on the microphone, I think that it was just it was a great use of that 6 minutes 10. But there was just also so much else to appreciate. I can't help but feel it was a through composed experience where you don't typically have that kind of verse chorus section. I think for a longer form track, that's totally fine if you can back it up with really sort of like articulate, sophisticated, or even like minimalist yet still intriguing instrumental passages and performances alongside the vocals, kind of narrating and providing a lead focus throughout it. And that's effectively what we got here. We did have a variety of different sort of like sections with some of them had specific tempos, others had variations of time signatures. There are a lot of different time signatures involved in this one, almost to the point where it became quite jagged and discombobulating. But I don't necessarily mind that, especially if that's something related to the subject matter that we're discussing. I think that if the music can represent what's going on within the lyrics, that's actually an intent, that's a positive thing, you know. So I listened to this and I think with that in mind, bearing that it is that is the structure of it, the main elements that we had within this are guitar, bass, and drums. And we did not need more than that. We had a wonderful array of different grooves on the kit, for example. Just at the start of the piece with the control on the kit there, working on those ride bells there, the drums, the ghost note rolls and stuff like that with the triplet fills. We can clearly play and keep time, and we navigate all the different time signatures and tempos effortlessly. it's very easy to listen to what they're trying to accomplish here and go, yeah, I think that it was more than enough on the drums. I like the dynamic range with some of those ghost notes and accents. I like that we had rhythmic unison with some of the guitar and bass parts. I like that we had almost a metronomic response or like purpose within the piece, keeping things nice and tight, regardless of whichever speed over we went in. And I appreciate that, yeah, we explored the whole kit as well. The guitar parts as well were tremendous. I liked how many different techniques we explored, whether it was power chords or tremolo picked kind of rhythm lead parts, or these really sort of wonderful double-tracked pinched harmonics with a little squeal and bend. It was really neat. And we explored, again, similar diatonic and chromatic notes there and a lot of different scales that allowed us, I think, to explore, like, for example, the Phrygian there for a bit of extra menace. But we also knew when to, not just do a lot of the kind of crazy chaotic stuff there, when to sort of play alongside the vocals and sort of provide a more unified experience. But then like at the 150 mark, some of those melodies or harmonies we have on the dual leads there are just really quite dramatic and intense, but also fun to listen to because of how they bounce around and the energy behind them. It's other points as well with the alternate chugged parts, such as at the 240 mark, where we have this kind of festering, stumbling kind of tonality or affectation to the way that we play these instruments. But then at 4 minutes 05, for example, we remove that distortion a little bit and step away from it, and it's kind of beautiful in a way that a bit of the chorus is there, the reverbs, etc., provides the bass a bit more room to sort of breathe, which we'll talk about in a moment. And the drums continue to articulate as things push forward within the ether. And just the way that you go from that interlude-ish kind of section into the full bore, excuse the pun, of everything kind of united there, and it's just we kind of pull away and come back together in ways that are quite interesting throughout. I feel like we probably return to some of the riffs as we go through the piece, but there's so much variation that it's almost difficult to be cognizant of those connections until you listen through it a second time, which I suppose inherently refers to having, replay value. But I just think the use of the feedback at the end with things kind of just oscillating there, sitting there in the soil, is just a great way to finish it. And so ultimately, yeah, the guitar parts are really well handled. I did also like the bass, not just because it was tight with the root notes and the fifths and part of some of the modal part stuff, but also because it was not afraid to do these kind of similar to the guitar, these articulations, these hammer-ons and pull-offs, these sort of like bends and slides and stuff like that, and palm mutes, and it went up an octave as well, sometimes went into the mid-range when it had the room to do so. So the bass also was a star player within this. Ultimately, just from a first impression basis, this seems like a band which not only know how to play their instruments well, but also know how to work together to collectively create something larger than the sum of the individual parts. There's just so much more that I want to talk about within this, but I feel like I might be repeating myself if I say much more. So I think thematically, while there are a lot of different chord progressions and bass lines and adjustments of time signature, tempo, and meter, ultimately, like, this was within the minor key, and I think the Phrygian modes were effective. There was never really a happy sort of twist or positive majorish kind of spin to it. There was use of the flat seconds and some diminished chords as well, I think, for a bit of extra, sort of like, to make it sound a bit more sort of twisted. And ultimately, I think it was very much the minor orient throughout it in different form factors, as well as the tone of the instruments that really sort of sold the aesthetic of it. Well, in addition to the vocals and everything else, things were quite well connected. The studio recording, mixing, and mastering is fantastic. I think it's commercial grade. The quality of the vocal production as well as the guitars, bass, and drums are fantastic. There's dynamic range to it. It's not over-compressed. Music surrounds you in the stereo field. I like that the guitars are double-tracked and they sound huge in the mix. Even when they're doing things, different things are winning together, it's fantastic. The bass has plenty of time or space to move around in the middle there. And there's space for the vocals as well. Then they've clearly paid attention to the post side of things to make it just as special as the rest. Nice and loud, bit of pumping side, chaining bus compression, limiting is handled, and I'm really happy to be listening through this album. We have 100 Pitches of Honey, track 2. Polyrhythms or polymeter?
every day. I will learn to speak that language, and sometime the clouds will go away. I will learn to speak that language. I will listen every day and express the things that cannot be conveyed. My love is 100 pictures of funny. Shivers of the air, what my body wants to say. My love is 100
Great transition from double time to half time.
Shivers of the air, what my body wants to say to yours. Thou art found to be undercover. 12 goats standing silent in the sun. There is no way to call it proper. We say God, we write Roman Kane, and the words get it all wrong.
Filthy, man.
No name whatever in our church. No name what our church.
What happened here? Whoa, what's happening here? What's happening here with Spotify?
No name whatever in our church. No name what our sins and birds. No name whatever in our church. No name what our sins and birds.
That's better. I was wondering what was occurring there, right?
No name what our sins and birds.
It's doing it again. Okay, let's try it again. I don't understand what's going on here, because it says that it's playing, but then it like cuts out. Brutal. So yeah, sorry about that. I don't know what Spotify was doing there. It was just having a stroke or something like that. Very strange behavior. So after listening through 100 Pieces of Honey again, just to kind of recalibrate, I'm not sure what it's about necessarily. And like calling for someone and offering them like 100 Pieces of Honey. So maybe this is like a trade in order to be able to do something specifically, like to invite someone to be involved in this. They talk about I will learn to speak that language as well. And it kind of makes me wonder whether the 100 Pictures of Honey is... Yeah, but then we talk about it burns later on. So I'm wondering if maybe the person that been summoned, or by learning the language, we've inadvertently caused there to be a fire or something like that. Like we talked about like tobacco and other things and vices earlier on, so I'm kind of wondering whether that's to do with that. Like it's maybe the vices that like are the honey that causes us to do things. I'm not sure. What I do want to sort of mention going on from that though is I think that the vocals in this consistently, they're consistent in quality. So the way that, again, we do that vocal fry, the way that that comes across is very sort of effective. There's also this kind of quiet There's also this kind of charisma to the starting point where we're a bit less kind of fryish there. That's kind of fun to listen to. You just never know what you're going to get with a singer in this band. And I appreciate that we can go across all these different vocal styles, exploring ourselves in different range. You know, like that the majority of the words to come through. And that even though, again, I'd probably need another time listening through it to really sort of like understand the story, ultimately it's still great to listen to them as they tell it. I think that sometimes when lyrics are a bit abstract or like when there's like things that mean different things, you got to kind of like, it just encourages you to kind of have re-listen value through that itself. But I do appreciate that, you know, even when we're not necessarily trying to be totally, like it's kind of down, 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 we're not trying to be like melodic necessarily with the way we communicate. It still kind of has a rhythmic awareness of what's going on around it. And it kind of digs itself further into the filth of a lot of what's going on instrumentally. Even though this piece is shorter than the other track at 3 minutes 56, I think that generally the composition is well fleshed out enough to kind of serve as an isolated concept, but it also feels like there's a lot going on. Like it's quite a busy sounding 4-minute song, if that makes sense. We have this fantastic chemistry between the guitar and bass at the start with the way that they both play at the beginning with those notes in rhythmic unison there, notching the octaves quite neatly. And like as we bring those toms in around the 19-second mark, we're just really sort of effective in the way that those flow forward. And the vocals, again, sort of singing over top. It's just nice to sort of set the scene for things to come. We do have familiar kind of concepts to the previous track, you know, the Great Fire. So there are, again, songwriting consistencies between these two tracks, with a mixture of different power chord and chugged parts and lots of sort of string skip sections. And there is also, to be fair, the addition of a guitar solo within this piece, which is quite interesting. I kind of dig the fact that we had that starting point to the solo, which had a legato feel to it, and it was almost kind of mystical sounding with the scale choice there. It's like the melodic or the harmonic minor there, the kind of quirkiness of the modulation, not necessarily sure how it was going to sort of resolve or where it was going. It's just kind of going upwards. And as we go further into the solo in that like later half of it, we add a bit of kind of like chorus to it, like a fourth harmony to it. And it just kind of sounds kind of surreal in a sense. It's just a very different sound to what we had when the vocals were leading us through it. And I kind of appreciate that we have a different alt layer, should I say an alt layer, just to kind of push us forward and just provide something a bit different. That kind of sweetness almost of those solo sections, despite some of the chromatics, is contrasted with a lot of those kind of unison bends and kind of filthier sounding guitar ideas that we have in that 3-minute section. As we kind of like stomp and struggle forward with the rhythm riffs there, going into the mid-range occasionally, but really kind of focusing the low end and the thump and groove of things. This track has a lot of different sort of like time signatures, and there's a polymeter stuff going on at the start with the drums again, to be fair, as I mentioned. And it's just kind of neat because it both illustrates very quickly the fact that they can play their instruments, but also that they're not willing to just go with stuff that's just perfectly in time with each other. You know that you've got going to have more variety within the composition itself. But just again, even when we're not going into the lead parts, just the articulation of those lead bits or those sort of squealy bits and rhythm parts on the guitars at like the 132nd mark are fantastic. So I think ultimately the bass was a bit more sort of like refined in this one, in the sense that, yeah, it did play in time with it, but it was more of a support in this one. The drums had a variety of different like sort of kick, snare, ride, and sort of crash patterns. I dig that the drum kit was like comfortable with both expressing its own sort of steady pace within sort of like kind of cymbal and kick and oriented beats, but it also, again, as I mentioned, was comfortable having the toms be like a part of it and having that kind of more sort of tribal feeling to it. And it also used some of those like in the solo section, which was kind of cool, almost as if we were aware that having the cymbals used too much in that part might just kind of compete in sense of brightness for what's going on with the solo parts. And like the use of syncopated parts there in like 16ths and even 30 seconds as well is just fantastic. It just, as well as being able to go between those time signatures on a kit and irrespective of anything else, that's quite technical. It's quite tricky stuff to play. And as we kind of go into that 3-minute 30 mark there, what I appreciate is that we're allowing the guitars to kind of build up on the sides with like these kind of alt sort of sub leads there. And it just sounds massive. It's almost kind of like the build we had near the end of the last track there, with more of a kind of a sort of a staggered kind of like layered phase. And then we just have again the vocals carry us out at the end, which I didn't mention at the time, but just that kind of gristle and growl to it was, you know, it was effervescent. It's just so kind of throaty, and it's just really, you are calling out that person's name, and that's very literal in that respect with nothing else surrounding it. Great sort of like symbolism there. But there's just lots of other fun ideas, like the little skittery kind of like up picks on some of the natural harmonics that we have, the flurry of notes that I didn't mention in that solo section, kind of like just the actual intricacy of that solo section on the guitar solo was great. And as a final note, I also just dig that there were times like at 2 minutes when there was just bass and drums, not with the guitar, not with the vocals, just allowing you to feel the pulse and rhythm of those. It's great music. I'm thematically very happy with the way that it explored the minor, because it definitely didn't sound like we were having a fun time with a lot of the subject matter that we were discussing, but also that we explored alternate minor scales was really cool. We had a similar amount of different chord progressions and, you know, like bass lines and sort of drum patterns with on meter and polymetric or polyrhythmic stuff going on at the start, and then other points there, chip choppy kind of like staggered kind of points there to kind of really sort of mess with the feeling of things, and again to further discombobulate. And yeah, honestly, well decorated. Yeah, but honestly, you get you can understand listening to the chord progressions, the bass lines, how that connects to the lyrics. Regardless of where you are in the piece there. It's intensely dramatic music. And I think ultimately with a really tight instrumental performance for the second track as well, it's just things are well connected. And similar comments to the previous track in terms of studio production. Again, the vocals, guitar, bass, drums are nice and present within the stereo field. There weren't any resonant frequencies within the frequency spectrum. There were some interesting echoes that I could hear on the vocals and how they kind of spread out to the side, which I quite liked. I do dig when we explore repeats and they kind of echo outwards there. We don't just have the vocals completely within the center of the stereo field, so that was kind of neat. No issues again with filtering. Leveling in general was tight. Nice and loud bit of pumping, and they can make both 4 minutes and 6 minute tracks. We just have one more song though for today, honestly. Just agency is necessary. We're really happy with it. Oh man, so good. Can't believe what he says. Those windows, the glass will get any clearer the longer you look. The harder it gets to entangle the breath. Time and time again, I'm unreal by myself. You can't wait to be taught. Agency is real, and you are a tangled web of experience and instinct. You take anything out of this. Agency is necessary. Oh, that hi-hat work is just sensational, dude. Sorry to interrupt. That was a really interesting line. No, I haven't done my homework. I abdicate that to my fellow. That was such a sick line, dude. I'm sorry for interrupting, but damn, man. Ooh. sensational, dude. Are those buzz rolls? Oh no, those are cymbals. Excellent. Agency is necessary. Track number 3. I think that this is about someone who is looking at themselves in a mirror and basically trying to identify whether they need to be responsible for themselves as well as the effect that they have on others or not. I really did dig that midsection there when they talked about, again, as I mentioned, not abdicating their responsibility because they just want to make money and just, you know, like that's, I guess I resonate with that in a sense because I find I too understand what they're getting at. There are people that just simply don't want to take responsibility for their purpose in this life and they just want to make it everyone else's kind of problem. And I can kind of see parallels of 100 Pictures of Honey and Great Fires in this, in the sense that I think this is more sort of referring to how we are directly responsible for things. But it's almost like they were doing a parody of a person that was like that. I think so. I think that was just so cool how they sort of personified that character, how they also again had the similar kind of vocal fry. Those beautiful harmonies at the end of the piece as well are really neat. I really dig how that flowed on and how they kind of just spread on the side and how they kind of articulated that hook line neatly at the end. And there was no filler either. Like anything that we said or that we sung was something that was directly referential to the piece, regardless of how we said it or how we growled it or how we sung it. And I think that that's important even when it's a shorter track than some of the previous ones, such, you know, at 4 minutes 19. You don't want to take the listener's attention for granted because it's still outside of that 2 to 4 minute sweet spot. But ultimately, structurally, just the way it thumps at you, just the way that it comes in with the guitars, bass, and drums, and it's so like minimalist. It's just so neat. It's very fierce, like it's trying to sort of knock at you and grab your attention. And you have the kind of vocal fry come in sort of like crescendoing. And you know, we have the double kicks as well, the triplets there and the cymbals and everything like that. And we come into more of the more complicated stuff that we're used to from Boarzoy at this point, you know, especially around the 30-second mark and onward. But it's just nice to have a minimalist start to proceedings, especially as some of the other ones have been a bit more sort of full on. It's just contrast between parts. And again, like I like the accents that we have on the ride part, such as around the 57-second mark, as well as how the vocals kind of riff over top of it and then the guitar parts grind along. You know, like there are lots of fun, interesting elements within this instrumentally. We kind of like explore sort of like legato, kind of hammer on pulley off, kind of like riffs there that are kind of seething in their sort of like emotion and purpose around the 120 mark. And I like how the drums kind of facilitate an environment for them to sort of like wriggle around in. And that part where he's talking about not doing his homework, there's this ferocity, this fire, this heaviness with the distortion that I think matches the output of the vocalist at that point. And like we explore again those Phrygian chordals or 0-1s there, or even 3-4s or something like that. In a way that kind of reminds me of sort of like Between the Buried and Me to a certain point. But I also dig how we don't just rely on palm chords or palm muted chords. We have at the end like 240 or something along those lines, like tremolo picked or alternate picked, like low lines on the guitar, and it's just kind of drones on, and it's just so fierce, I think. When we go into the 3:05 mark and we got those kind of shouts there going on, and we have bam bam, and then you have these really sort of like discordant, like uncomfortable chords on the guitar, but it's just so furious, I think, after the conversation we had at that 2-minute mark. And like we kind of fester and we sort of stumble on as we go through the piece until we get to that end point. And it's almost sort of glorious with the way that those vocals harmonize over top on the sides of the stereo field, the guitar chords, they kind of ring out there. And it's like we've come to a close. We've had this entire sort of like internal monologue, and we've come to a conclusion about it, which I assume goes into bib and bottle. But as the kind of guitars feed out the end, you don't necessarily know at this point if you feel closer to understanding the true the precedent of it or not. Ultimately, though, I think your agency made a bit more sense to me. I understand what they were trying to communicate. And I think I understand what this album is about now after listening to 3 of these tracks. Ultimately, though, again, like a phenomenal performance, like on the bass, guitar, and drums. I appreciate a lot of the similar techniques on the guitar across the other 2 pieces, you know, exploring both diatonics and notes outside of it for a bit of kind of edge and spiciness to it. It's nice to have the leads as a focal point. And I know we had a guitar solo in the previous track, but I don't think we need to have guitar solos with every song if the vocals are sort of interesting enough. They can be a sometimes thing. It's just when the vocals are a bit more sort of like monotonous or less sort of like energetic that you need to have other instruments step in and kind of elevate things. The drums played a variety of different grooves and chops and were never sort of offbeat or off point there. Fantastic use of the cymbals and sort of buzz rolls and other parts at this point. They also knew when to slow down and be sort of pocket, which I appreciate as well. And the bass pocketing as well for a lot of this song. It's just nice to have that teamwork. You know, very successful. Ultimately, outside of some really interesting sort of fourth harmonies, like in other tracks, which give it almost sort of like exotic feel, we had again the same sort of minor, alien, and sort of Phrygian modal kind of textures and patches across a variety of these different chord progressions and bass lines within this one. Again, it's sort of like a lot of this is sort of through composed music where you go on a journey or adventure with them discussing individual topics per track, and I feel like that's completely sensible in this sort of situation, that you don't need to make it like a catchy track if it affects you in another way. And so ultimately, you just have, again, these ideas put forward there with the tone of the instruments combined with the bass lines and chord progressions and drum beats and the passion of the vocalist, and that tells you as much as you need to know and encourages you to hear more. In studio recording, mixing and mastering, similar comments as prior, no complaints or notes in regards to the way things are presented. Rhythms have a great sort of like present, and vocals have a great presence to them, greatest compression, EQing, sort of reverb towers, etc. Guitar, bass, and drums are well sort of like composed and recorded. You know, they're just solid takes. Great use of dynamic range on some parts, such as the drums, especially with some of those quieter hits there. I like the ghost notes that they have there and the fact that it has life and it isn't too choked. Guitar is nice and heavy on the sides, bass sort of like resounding in the middle, and things mesh well within the spectrum without any sort of resonant frequencies, nice and loud pumps. But it's allowed to sort of be itself as well, and it isn't overproduced at the same time. It's not squashed or kind of like polished in a way where it seems inauthentic. It's just a really solid recording. Be ultimately 3 for 3, and we're going to talk about these tracks more in the conclusion. Because welcome to the conclusion of my review of these 3 tracks from an act named Boarzoy off of the Great Fires album, titled Great Fires or The Great Fires, 100 Pitches of Honey and Agency. In this section, I'm going to provide an overall analysis of these 3 tracks, as well as any sort of applicable constructive critique, and then finally my general thoughts from a listener's perspective, the analysis being from lyrics and vocals all the way through the studio production. I usually get that the other way around, but apparently I didn't this time. But first of all, what do we think this track, or these tracks, are about? I think actually the album in general is about people's inability to sort of like take care of the environment and the world around them, whether interpersonally or in terms of, again, like literal fires, the issues with temptation that we have, not taking responsibility or not being able to sort of handle it, and the arguments we have against it. And then finally understanding that the walls are made in skeletons, and that we aren't listening to what's around us, and that we don't necessarily know if things will improve if we're given another chance. I think it's a really sort of like eloquent way of discussing this subject matter. I think that it's an interesting story. I assume the rest of the album fits in more of those pieces, and I feel like if you're like these 3 tracks, it's probably worth listening through the rest of it. It's available on digital streaming platforms, but as well as Bandcamp. But the vocals in this album are fantastic. We can sort of do our growls, our screams, our clean vocals, our harmonies. We can do this, we can yell, we can sort of speak, we can do a variety of different ways of communicating, and all of them are quite effective. There was no point where I listened to this and I was disinterested in what the singer had to say or what they wanted to sort of talk about. I think there were some lines, again, as I've said several times, in like Agency, where like I sort of related to it and I had more of a sort of a visceral reaction to it, and that doesn't happen often. I've had people sort of tell me off for not reacting to lyrics, but I only do so when I feel like it, well, I just do. You know, those are how reactions work, right? So ultimately, I think that effectively, to get a reaction out of me with vocals, that clearly they know what they're doing. But outside of that, it's just simply, it was exciting listening to them. They're very sort of charismatic and easy to listen to. Even when they're being a bit more sort of ferocious and aggressive, it's like it suits the music, so it's fine. So ultimately, we handled ourselves well on the microphone. In terms of the structure of these tracks, you know, and the expression was great as well. In terms of the structure of these tracks, you know, with really sort of solid vocal technique. And we actually, no, I'm not done with the vocals, because we also hit the notes cleanly. Those harmonies were on point. And even when there were moments where we sort of went chromatic or sort of like we glided out, down, or up there, we hit them neatly. We have a good sort of awareness and ability to sort of control ourselves regardless of how we're doing things. And it's very important for this kind of music, because especially with how colorful the harmonies are with some of the guitars and the chromatics, if you're off note, it's going to sound gross. But they understand that. They did well. Structurally, these tracks, each of them are through composed about 3.5 minutes to 6.5 minutes. No notes. Honestly, a wide variety of different guitar, bass, and drum lines. The drums are absolutely phenomenal. I just loved the variety of ways we integrated the main sort of like quarters, eighths, triplets, and sixteenths into the groove, as well as 30-seconds. We knew when to sort of pocket, play more minimally, or in a minimalist fashion, but we also explored a lot of different time signatures and polyrhythmic or polymetric stuff. We were very capable on the kit. There was never a moment where I felt like we were overextending. They had the ability to play along with the other instrumentalists, or they could like handle things on their own. There was never any filler. And it was also nice for them just to allow the guitar to be by itself, you know, just to not have any drums at all. Sometimes the bass and drums are together, and to talk about the bass, I appreciate that the bass was predominantly a supportive pocketing texture, but that also explored, such as in, you know, the Great Fires. I wasn't afraid of kind of going up to this upper range, doing some legato kind of hammer on and poly-offy kind of stuffs there. It was nice to sort of hear it kind of be a bit more active, and you know, I knew when to step up and when to kind of come back a little bit, and that's just sensible songwriting and performance, you know, stuff. I appreciate that. It's just good to have those fundamentals covered whilst being able to sort of excel when applicable. The guitars are tremendous as well. I loved the variety of different sort of like power chordal, drone kind of alternate picked, you know, lots of single string rhythmic kind of melodic sort of harmonic stuff going on there, exploring all these different notes within the major minor scales and the Phrygians and the chromatics there. Some in the solo section as well with the harmonic and melodic minors, it was tremendous as well, with the fourth harmonies and the interesting effects on it as well. I like the chorusy clean parts. I love the distortion as well. I like how the guitars were aware of what the bass and drums were doing and would play along those, or they just kind of do their own thing. It was very active, never predictable, and they you know, whether they were in time with each other or doing different time signatures or different sort of meters, it never felt superfluous. It was ultimately just a really wonderful instrumental performance across the board. It would have taken time to write and record and produce and perform these tracks, and I appreciate and respect the effort they put into trying to make a compelling listening experience. There is no moment where I was disinterested. It's very good. So I think ultimately, again, great use of pinches and hammer-ons and pull-offs and bendy bits and other sort of like techniques there as well. Articulations are on point. Nice use of dynamic range. Great for the guitars to be minimalist as well at certain points. Ultimately, though, performance is tight, not out of place. Thematically, typically minor or Phrygian flat second leaning, occasionally sort of like chromatic, occasionally, again, very occasionally harmonic and melodic minor with some of the vocal or guitar parts. But ultimately, this is not happy music. This is not designed to be fun, sort of like exciting, joy stuff. This is we're kind of almost mourning the lack of a solution in certain regards. It's ferocious and fiery and spicy, and it's meant to kind of get at you a little bit. And I think that they managed to achieve that here with the use of the chord progressions and the bass lines that they put forward. Ultimately, studio production as well was tight. You know, seamless transfers between elements. It's just that we recorded guitar, bass, drums, and vocals very well. I think nothing was overproduced. The vocals had great sort of like compression, EQing, and reverb, some delay, echo tails occasionally. Sometimes the vocals would be out on the sides. They'd sort of pan out to the sides as well. The guitars were nicely double tracked on the sides of the stereo field. And the bass as well, resounded in the low end. The drums decorated as well. I liked the dynamic range to the drums, how some of those quiet ghost notes on the hi-hats and sort of rides were handled, but also that it was bombastic whenever it needed to be with everything else. And ultimately, yeah, good dynamic range production and compositionally, nice and loud bass compression limiting is handled. No applicable constructive critique for me, just 3 really sensational tracks. And from a final general listener's perspective, I have found a band that I would like unconditionally listen to outside of reviews. That is rare, but I really enjoyed my time with this. They are great musicians, and I wish them all the best of luck in future with the musical endeavors, primarily because I think they're making important music that if you take the time to listen to, you might just learn something, especially if you don't necessarily have that all-important agency, because it is necessary. But thank you for watching my review of this track. Thank you for watching my review of these tracks from an act named Boarzoy off of the Great Fires album. These tracks titled The Great Fires, 100 Pictures of Honey, and Agency is Necessary. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please go show them some love via their various social medias as well as Spotify and I think Bandcamp and other digital streaming platforms. And stay cool and stay safe, and please remember to support your local musicians and artists at this point in time, as you need the help more than ever with all the crazy stuff going on in the world. And I'll catch you in the next SP Reacts. Spiderhands out.